Hello, I'm Alicia Barry. Welcome to the Business Summer Series. Coming up, some of our best stories on renewables, including calls for an end-of-life strategy as sales of electric vehicles and home batteries take off.
And obviously it saves the mining of commodities if we already have a resource from the waste batteries that are coming into us.
And victim of its own success, rapid solar uptake causes a headache for the grid. Are batteries a solution?
That power that's being generated by the solar panels is just worth so much more to me than it is to the power company.
Plus, a road to nowhere, the state taxes that could put off Australia's electric vehicle revolution. Thousands of electric cars and home storage units are being recalled across the country after concerns the batteries inside them will catch on fire. As sales of these products grow, there are calls for a national plan for recycling waste from renewables. Amelia Turzon with this story.
These are the banks of the batteries.
Jason Zorzit has been dismantling old and broken batteries for years, but the ones inside electric cars are new to him.
We expected this to take a little bit longer for the electric batteries to come through. We were expecting in the next 2 to 3 years.
This lithium-ion battery was pulled from a Hyundai EV after fears it would catch on fire. Almost 1,000 units have been sent to Ecobat for recycling as part of the global recall. Industry groups say this waste is just the start of what's to come.
We're starting to see them trickle in now, but we can expect to see them increasing exponentially over the next 5, 10, 15 years.
And that could pose big problems.
Batteries contain toxic, hazardous and flammable materials. We need to ensure that the collection and recycling network is safe and transparent.
The risk is something that this battery recycler experienced in 2019 when its warehouse went up in flames.
The issue really is at collection. If we don't collect batteries properly, if we don't isolate terminals, if we don't understand the energy that's left in a battery.
EnviroStream is now recycling more from electric cars like this Mitsubishi hybrid unit. It's also processing old and broken home storage units, including more than 5,000 from LG after another product recall.
Each battery has a range of commodities which are quite valuable in the market, and we have the opportunity here in Australia to recycle the growing demand for lithium battery.
It's shredding them at its plant.
This is the cooled down shredded material. It includes components like plastic, aluminium, cobalt, nickel, and importantly, lithium, which is the mineral that's currently in so much demand due to the rise in renewable technologies.
To reuse in a circular economy, and obviously it saves the mining of commodities if we already have a resource from the waste batteries that are coming into us.
The CSIRO says this circular economy could be worth up to $30 billion by 2036 if industry gets on board with a national plan. The Battery Stewardship Council is working on that and hopes to get the top brands involved.
Tesla is the biggest manufacturer of electric cars in the world. Its batteries have an 8-year warranty, and it's confirmed that it has an Australian recycler, but it wouldn't say which company it is.
Individual companies are coming up with their own solutions. We need a strategic solution that provides an end-of-life solution.
The federal government says it'll all come down to industry cooperation.
What we've found works really well with product stewardship is bringing manufacturers and bringing industry on board without a regulatory stick.
Those already dealing with the waste want a tough plan soon.
Recycling of batteries has to be mandatory. We can't just turn a blind eye to it and think it's going to go away.
A warning call about our renewable future.
Amelia Turzon there. Governments and companies were facing huge scrutiny over carbon emissions in the lead up to COP26, the United Nations Climate Change Conference held in Glasgow. The buildings we use and live in are also a major source of emissions. Commercial spaces and homes that are greener cost less to run and sell for more, as Stephanie Chalmers reports.
Louise Kite describes concrete like cookies.
So the rocks are the chocolate chips, and then the cement is like the flour that sticks that all together.
After 2 decades working with the material, the recipe is looking very different.
To move to a low carbon binder, we need to use other substitutes. Every gram of cement we take out, we reduce the CO2 content.
Carbon dioxide is released when the materials used to make cement, including limestone, are heated in a kiln. That production process accounts for around 7% of global emissions.
We recognise that cement is one of the largest carbon emitting sectors in the globe.
While companies like Boral are changing their products, they still need customers to buy them. The firm's boss says some in the construction industry are a bit hesitant to try new materials, but government mandates help.
If you think about road infrastructure, there are a couple of state governments that are specifying low carbon concrete. It's early steps and quite small steps. We'd love to see governments and other specifiers go on the front foot.
Using lower emissions construction products can also help a building earn green credentials.
So within the Green Star rating system, we take materials into account. It's the plants, it's the energy, it's everything to do with air quality. So it's a holistic rating system.
The industry body is now expanding its ratings from commercial to residential properties, starting with developers who build large volumes of new homes, like Stockland and Metricon.
The biggest asset in your entire life, your house, we don't have a national disclosure system for that in Australia. The role is for us to put in voluntary standards to lift the market up and make space for regulation to come in underneath.
Changes to the National Construction Code will be introduced next year, plus a scorecard to assess the energy efficiency of existing homes. But it's voluntary. Beyond environmental concerns, there are also financial reasons homeowners may consider opting in. Economist Diaswati Mardiasmo found existing homes with features like solar panels or grey water systems were worth more.
They're actually being sold at a much higher price compared to the median price for the suburb, and also quicker as well.
Jason York has seen rising demand for green features. The insulation he installs helps regulate the temperature of houses to make heating and cooling more efficient.
It's really taken off. It's getting to the point where we're having a lot of trouble getting stock in. Keeping up with demand has been a huge issue.
But he says a box ticked on a real estate ad stating that a house is insulated is no guarantee it actually works.
There seems to be this misconception that the insulation is going to achieve magic on its own, and it really comes down to the environment. You need to put it in a dry, moisture-free, airtight environment. Thermal properties are only going to go so far until we change the building standards.
A message from the front line of building.
Stephanie Chalmers there. 170,000 households with rooftop solar are seeing cuts to the amount of money they receive for selling excess power back to the grid. Data suggests changes to feed-in tariffs and financial incentives are pushing more Australians to install home batteries, which could have ramifications for the market power of energy companies. Amelia Turzon again.
This couple installed a big solar system so they could power their home and generate excess electricity to sell to the grid.
To cut down the energy bill and possibly to bring it to zero, so we oversized the system for that reason.
So what's the deal?
This strategy worked at first, but then their provider, Energy Australia, began slashing the amount that it pays them for their excess power. From October, it will again cut feed-in tariffs for 170,000 households.
It changes completely all the plans that we have made in terms of the return of the investment that we've done.
The energy retailer and its peak body say that feed-in tariffs are falling as cheap energy floods the market.
We've got so many renewable generation systems coming online. That means electricity is getting cheaper in the wholesale market. Therefore, the value of the electricity that a solar PV household puts back into the grid is also decreasing in value.
We have produced 15 megawatts.
The Rignolos wonder why the cost of energy they're buying back from the grid isn't dropping significantly too.
It's $80 less in credit, which is a shocker. There's no negotiation. There's It's just a one-way conversation.
The industry says the cuts are passed on, but retail prices include many other overheads, including the cost of networks, poles and wires.
More than 2.6 million Australian homes now have solar panels, but far fewer have battery systems to store their excess power. And that is changing as price-sensitive consumers weigh up their options.
Single-phase property, that's right. Full home backup. Excellent. Each time that we see a change in feed-in tariffs or a proposed change, even from a federal body, we see a real uptick in customer inquiries.
Exclusive data from the nation's biggest battery installer shows a 186% spike in customer inquiries after a so-called sun tax was proposed, and even more interest when solar reforms were announced. Energy economists say the trend towards battery storage has a downside for power companies.
They are scoring an own goal. What we're seeing in the market reaction is customers are wanting to grow more of their own vegetables. And when you're selling vegetables wholesale, you don't want your customers to do that.
Absolute perfection. That was very satisfying. Yes. Very nice, very clean, looks the part.
Alexander Payne is another Energy Australia customer who's facing cuts to his feed-in tariff.
I'd been thinking about the battery for a while, and that was just the trigger.
At $13,000 without subsidies, batteries still won't financially stack up for most households. But for Alexander, it is an investment he's willing to make.
That power that's being generated by the solar panels is just worth so much more to me than it is to the power company.
Power that's now being controlled by the people.
With the global push toward renewables, the Australian battery industry is trying to pull back its reliance on international suppliers like China. Companies want to make more of the components here, following surging demand for home energy storage systems. Experts say the sector could be worth more than $7 billion in the next decade.
These workers are building Australia's renewable future.
We have 3 cables to this component and this put in the battery as a safety device.
This factory employs 50 local workers, giving some a second chance at a career.
I was a stay-at-home mum and I got offered the job and came in for an interview and on-site training, and here I am.
The company's batteries mostly go into off-grid homes to store solar energy. As the Australian market for home storage grows, its founder is on a mission to hire local staff, but that is proving a tough business.
We're competing against markets where there's high levels of government support, where there are lower wages, where there are tariffs to protect their own markets.
At every turn, local production is more expensive.
Typically, we'd be looking around a 30 to 40% saving if we were to have the cabinets manufactured in China.
Lithium is one of the most critical metals when it comes to making batteries, and the world's biggest exporter of it is Australia.
We've got nearly 50% market share at that segment of the battery value chain, but it falls away quite significantly after that.
China, followed by South Korea and Japan, dominate the next stages of production.
The core lithium cells that power batteries aren't being made here. Instead, these are being imported from China, and that is where the real growth is for Australia's battery industry.
The Australian battery industry is worth $1.3 billion a year, employing 6,000 people, most of them in mining. But if we could do more of the production here, the industry could be worth almost $7 billion by 2030, creating almost 35,000 jobs. Experts say that money is already going into refining raw minerals here.
For example, in Western Australia, more than $2 billion is currently being invested in purified battery chemicals plants, lithium hydroxide, nickel sulphate. So we can see momentum moving downstream from mining.
And new players say they turn those locally refined minerals into lithium cells.
We need to stop importing, and sometimes importing Australian product that's been processed overseas. We really want to stop that.
But not everybody is convinced. This Brisbane company makes its hardware in China to keep expenses down.
Cost of the system is the single hurdle to broader uptake in Australia right now, and so we need to attack it from that perspective.
He believes that pushing for an end-to-end local battery industry is more about nationalism than sense.
It's a little bit of the pendulum swinging back after years of embraced globalization and free trade. We have to produce products with a very, very high value add that are high-tech products because labour is essentially expensive in Australia.
His company is focusing on software development, which employs 35 local workers. But for Bradley Patton, seeing staff on the factory floor is the biggest reward.
I love what we're doing. I love seeing the results of what we're building, and I just feel strongly that we need to provide opportunities for employment in Australia.
Charging ahead with new industries.
Energy providers are being challenged by the development of mid-sized batteries, which are being hailed as a game changer for communities. Network provider Ausgrid is trialling them in Sydney, and manufacturers are ramping up production to cater for towns, housing developments and schools. But the storage systems are expensive, and experts say the logistics are fraught.
In this old sawmill, innovation is in the works. These solar panels will feed energy into this battery, named after its community, Yakandanda.
When it first came in, I was actually very nervous because it's 4 tonne and I've never craned a battery from a truck.
He had reason to be protective. It's been a labour of love.
It's taken a lot of time, a lot of organisation, a lot of planning. It's had to be shipped here from China. It cost a lot of money, it cost about $200,000.
The 274 kilowatt-hour battery is a big deal for this Victorian town of less than 2,000 people. It will store renewable energy that can power 40 homes.
We're incredibly excited. It's the culmination of quite a lot of work.
Yakko One will also provide a backup power supply for the town.
It's a game changer for businesses, it's a game changer for residents, and it's a game changer for the network.
Only 1 in 60 Australian homes have a battery, and for some people the technology is just too expensive. Community batteries like this one aim to make the technology more accessible for everybody.
It's not just tiny towns that are looking into these batteries. In Fremantle, a similar battery is going into a greenfields development where every household will have solar panels.
They'll be supplying their own electricity from those solar panels during the day and trading with each other via the battery when the sun is not shining.
She thinks the concept will bring more renewable energy storage to apartments. Energy economists say they also challenge a market that's set up around long-distance grids.
This allows for distributed electricity production to be used locally. And I think if it's taken up will lead to the fragmentation of the electricity system. The electricity industry is petrified about the innovations in battery storage.
Big players are trying to get in on the action. Network provider Ausgrid is trialling community storage systems in Sydney.
They want the batteries to be on the network so that their network continues to ship electricity.
While major companies have the cash to fund new projects, the payback for small communities can be up to a decade. Yakandanda's $200,000 battery was only possible with state and federal grants.
We simply need the capital cost of the batteries to decline to around half their levels, and then we're going to see very rapid uptake.
Battery manufacturers aren't predicting a steep decrease in prices anytime soon. Federal Labor is pledging to spend $200 million on community batteries like these if it gets elected. Meanwhile, the current government is spending $50 million on microgrids, including Yakandanda's project.
Yakandanda is the little town that could. And Yakandanda is a wonderful case study of communities taking control of their own energy needs.
Residents hope they'll inspire other communities.
It's just so doable. We've got the technology, we just need to get on and do it.
Just like this little town with big ideas.
The uptake of solar panels on homes has been so successful, the energy regulator says the excess power they create is causing problems for the grid. Financial incentives for sending electricity to the network are being cut, and regulators are even considering penalties.
Australians are obsessed with solar.
Is an absolute phenomenon. We've gone from 0.2% of households in 2007 to 20% now, and that's 2.6 million households.
In Darwin, installations were encouraged by subsidies and very generous payments for power sent to the network.
You were using the grid to store the excess energy that your solar was producing, so there was no physical need to have the batteries in at the time.
But the regulator believes the massive uptake of solar across the country is an issue.
All of that power coming in at the same time in the middle of the day for an electricity network that was set up to get power to your house is causing problems, and we like to refer to it as traffic jams or congestions.
The Northern Territory has now slashed the amount of money that households receive for power, known as the feed-in tariff, and offered subsidies for technology that's being installed under these rooftops.
Okay, battery candid battery port.
The homeowner got solar panels along with a battery, allowing him to store all the electricity he generates.
At the end of the day, that's why I've got the battery now, and hopefully that'll prove to be just as good as having that feed-in tariff.
The challenge at the moment is that we've got more solar than demand during the limited generation period in the middle of the day. So if you're able to store your energy, then you can use it at night time yourself.
5 years after the first Tesla system went into an Australian home, battery sales are growing. 31,000 were installed last year. There are now 110,000 households with batteries, but that's still less than 5% of all homes with solar panels. The data shows that it's mostly new solar systems that are getting batteries. The question is, how do you encourage the millions of people already with solar to invest in storage too? For some families, cost is still a barrier.
I would like it to last a long time for the amount of money that it's going to cost me, because if I weighed that up against whatever electricity cost coming off the grid and it was more expensive, then that's not really worth it for me.
Battery prices haven't fallen so significantly as people might have hoped for, and so therefore we're seeing almost a steady market.
Subsidies seen in the Territory are ramping up nationally and feed-in tariffs continue to fall. The industry says it's now at a tipping point.
What I suspect we'll see is a removal or a reduction of those feed-in tariffs over time, and we're about to see tariff repricing nationally in July. It'll be interesting to see what people do.
The regulator is even considering penalising homes that export power to the grid when the market doesn't want it.
I think it will definitely drive battery uptake, because it's basically lost revenue for those solar homes, and the only way that they can really capture that revenue is by having a battery.
While Warwick Johnston has solar panels and a battery on his home, he's still wary of calling a boom just yet.
But I see that there's a big future both for the solar industry and for home energy storage as well.
Those who've invested are happy.
I think the batteries are the way of the future, really.
Charging ahead with a renewable revolution.
When it comes to electric vehicles, Australia is lagging behind the rest of the world. Victoria and South Australia are pushing ahead with the introduction of road usage charges for EV drivers. The industry calls the proposal startling, at a time when uptake is so low and costs are already high. Stephanie Chalmers with this report.
Fiona Thomas is one of a small group of Australian drivers who's gone electric.
When you compare them to a traditional car for the same sort of car, it's still quite a bit more.
It's the upfront price of the vehicles that had put Fiona off the purchase, but she's found a way to try before she buys.
We have a subscription EV service that allows customers to take up an EV, fully serviced EV and with installed chargers at their home.
As one of Australia's biggest energy providers, AGL has an interest in the electric future of cars. At hundreds of dollars a week, the cost of the subscription isn't small change, but it's a fraction of buying and registering an electric vehicle. Overseas, there's more affordable models available, for example, in the UK.
They have some 35 models of electric vehicles available under our $60,000 price point, so what we usually call the mass market price point. In Australia, we have about 4 models available in that range.
Bayard Jafari says global car makers aren't focused on Australia.
They obviously do a scan of the market right around the world when deciding where to put particularly their cheaper electric vehicles, where to sell them. And they say that in the US, Europe, right across Asia, governments are providing subsidies in the range of $10,000 to $15,000 rebates.
Australia no longer manufactures cars, so what the world makes, we buy. And global car makers are moving in one direction. General Motors has pledged to end production of internal combustion engine vehicles by 2035. Ford has committed to release only electric vehicles in Europe by 2030. Jaguar and Bentley have made similar pledges. In Australia, electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles currently have less than 1% market share.
The AEMO at the moment are only forecasting 1 in 5 vehicles sold in 2030 will be an EV. We would like to see double or triple that. Certainly where Norway are today, they're at 54% of vehicles sold in the last year are a fully electric vehicle.
Despite the slow uptake, several states already want to tax electric vehicles, which aren't subject to the federal fuel excise. Victoria and South Australia have proposed road usage charges.
It's far too early to actually tax them and make them more expensive. Is a pretty startling call.
The NRMA says road usage taxes overall need updating as the revenue raised from the fuel excise continues to fall.
If you look at new cars coming on the market in Australia, they are overwhelmingly more fuel efficient, and that means that the current system of tax lends heavily towards those who can afford it least, families on lower incomes, people in rural and regional areas who aren't going to go out and get a new car every couple of years.
We only need to charge once or twice in a 2-week period.
It's early days for Fiona Thomas's EV experiment, but so far the running costs are much cheaper than paying for petrol.
If we can charge from the solar panels, it's zero cost.
One type of charge that's welcome for EV drivers.
And that's all from this summer series special on renewables. For more on those stories, head to the ABC News website or catch up with the latest on iView. I'm Alicia Barry. Thanks for watching.